Was Bonnie Parker really the cigar-smoking gunwoman of legend, or was she something entirely different? Behind the myths and Hollywood movies lies the true story of a tiny Texas girl who became half of America's most infamous outlaw couple. This is the real Bonnie Parker. Bonnie Elizabeth Parker was born on October 1, 1910, in Rowena, Texas. Her father died when she was just 4 years old, leaving her mother to raise 3 children in poverty. But Bonnie wasn't just another poor farm girl. She was bright, fiery, and full of dreams. She loved poetry, theater, and the movies. Teachers saved her poems because they were unusually clever for her age. Even in her teenage years, Bonnie dreamed of fame, not crime. At just 4'11" and barely 90 pounds, she seemed delicate, but those who knew her described her as witty, fearless, and magnetic. People noticed Bonnie when she walked into a room. At 16, Bonnie married a man named Roy Thornton. The marriage fell apart almost immediately, but she never bothered with divorce. She kept wearing the wedding ring for the rest of her life. Then, in January 1930, she met Clyde Barrow. Bonnie was 19, Clyde was 20. The bond between them was instant. When Clyde went to prison soon after, Bonnie showed her devotion in a daring way. She smuggled him a pistol hidden in her clothing. He escaped, was recaptured, but he never forgot her loyalty. When he got out, they were inseparable. By 1932, Bonnie had joined Clyde and what became known as the Barrow Gang. They robbed gas stations, grocery stores, and the occasional small bank. But the truth? They weren't living glamorous outlaw lives. They often stole just $5 or $10. They ate cold beans from cans, slept in cars, and stayed in cheap motels. In 1933, a car crash left Bonnie with severe burns on her leg. She could barely walk afterward, and often had to be carried by Clyde. Yet she kept going, determined to stay by his side. Newspapers painted Bonnie as a cigar-smoking gunwoman. The reality? That famous cigar photo was a joke. The gang had found props in a stolen car and staged playful pictures. The press, desperate for a sensational story, ran the photos on front pages. Overnight, Bonnie became a glamorous outlaw queen, but in reality she rarely fired guns during shootouts. Clyde and the men handled most of the violence. Still, Bonnie wasn't innocent. She chose the life. She rode with Clyde through gunfights, police chases, and constant danger. Behind the headlines, Bonnie Parker was a young woman with quirks and habits. She loved chocolate and Coca-Cola, and asked for them whenever she could. She was terrified of thunderstorms. She once worked as a waitress, remembered by customers as funny and kind. And even as an outlaw, she wrote letters home to her mother. Most famously, she wrote poetry. In the story of Bonnie and Clyde, she predicted exactly how their lives would end. She wrote, "Someday they'll go down together, and they'll bury them side by side. To few, it'll be grief, to the law a relief, but it's death for Bonnie and Clyde." By 1934, law enforcement had had enough. Working with former associates of the gang, officers set up an ambush in rural Louisiana. On the morning of May 23, 1934, Bonnie and Clyde drove into the trap in their stolen Ford Viv 8. In less than 2 minutes, more than 150 bullets ripped through the car. Bonnie Parker was just 23 years old. After their deaths, the legend of Bonnie and Clyde only grew. Newspapers sold their story as a mix of romance, crime, and tragedy. The 1967 film Bonnie and Clyde turned them into cultural icons. But the truth is more complicated. Bonnie Parker wasn't just a gun-toting outlaw. She was a poor Texas girl, a poet, a dreamer, and a woman who chose love, even when it meant destruction. In the end, Bonnie became a symbol of rebellion during the Great Depression, remembered not just for the crimes she rode through, but for the poetry she left behind. So, was Bonnie Parker a cold-blooded killer or a tragic romantic? Maybe she was both. But one thing is certain, her story still captures the world's imagination nearly a century later. If you enjoyed this dive into history, don't forget to like, subscribe, and check out more stories of legends, lore, and true tales.